Hello, and welcome to another episode of RTAF Podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Norris. This week, we have no new Patreon subscribers, so if you want to go support the podcast, go on over to patreon.com/RTAF Podcast, where you'll find 3 separate tiers of subscription available. And we'll just get right into it. This week, we've got Martin Stensaas. Martin is a painter, and a damn good one too. He was actually the first artist that I saw in a gallery when I moved to Denver. I hadn't spoken with him in a while, but it was nice to kind of re-meet via Zoom. And in this episode, we talk about a lot of topics ranging from his artwork, his process, flow states, depth psychology, UFOs, and paranormal phenomenon, and a lot more. Really enjoyed this talk. I think you guys will too. This may be the shortest intro I've done, so plug in the Patreon one more time. Go check it out, patreon.com/RTAF Podcast. Link in the description. And also, please be sure, rate, review, subscribe. Tell your homies, tell your family, tell your pets. Pets love it, I hear. I hear we're popping off among dogs ages 2 to 7. So, a little bit past the puppy phase, they love us. Anyway, let's get right into it. Thanks for being on, Martin. Here we go. And we can just sort of answer here in the beginning, just to get comfortable and everything. But yeah, how have you been?
Good, really busy. I don't know, just lots of projects and travel, and Sunny and I kind of tag team on a lot of her work too. So
nice.
She's got a lot of cool things going on with regard to psychedelic assisted therapy and related techniques and technologies, and yeah, so
nice. Does she have a background?
So that takes.
Sorry, does she have a background in like psychology or anything like that?
Yeah. She's a marriage and family therapist, trained at Pacifica Graduate Institute, which is a Jungian place. It's the Joseph Campbell Library is there, so she's got that kind of as the background, and then works in a variety of different modalities, including EMDR and IFS, and that dovetails nicely with her more recent training through CIIS in psychedelic assisted therapy and research. And now she's doing a lot of work in ketamine assisted therapy.
Nice.
And some other kind of tech facilitated things that are exciting.
Sweet. That sounds like a handful. How are you helping her out with that?
I mean, just kind of like we're always bouncing ideas off each other, and just sort of extra hemispheres.
Yeah, right. Oh yeah. 4 hemispheres are better than 2, right?
Right. Yeah.
Well, sweet, man.
So we kind of we team up on a lot of stuff. Same thing with the collaborative paintings. It's kind of like we just are used to art directing one another with art as well as other topics.
Nice.
Yeah,
I was looking at so I was just kind of browsing through some of your paintings right before we hopped on here. I saved a few. Maybe I'll pull them up right now just so we can talk about them. But in my notes here, I asterisked it out, right? And I put Carl Jung archetypes. And I'm going to see if I can screen share here so people who are going to be able to watch the video will be able to see this. But you have a couple pieces titled Dark Madonna that I thought, just for whatever reason, they remind me of kind of like the like anima archetype, like the primordial kind of like it's kind of hard for me to remember all of the Jungian stuff, but I
Well, and
should.
that's kind of the thing with it. It doesn't necessarily have to have the right label. It's like some images just have that resonance where it's like you're tapping into this, whether it's collective or it's just evocative. It kind of has that effect.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Okay, let's see. Let's see if this does this come up as like something different now. Can you see?
I'm seeing you in a sub window, and now, yeah, I'm seeing your screen share, and you're about to pick Dark Madonna
Yeah,
from
okay.
your
Sweet.
list.
Nice. So yeah, like I'm just real fascinated with this one. Um do you have any I guess we can just dive right in. What was like the did you guys just freestyle this at first? Or this is just you, right?
Yeah, that one's just me,
Right, yeah. Sorry.
and yeah, that one was like most of my work, but not all of it. It was a freestyle kind of thing where um, it just kind of. I like to do it that way. It's kind of like just freestyling until something starts to emerge, and it's like, oh yeah, that kind of looks like shoulders, and, and then it just sort of, once it starts to gel, then there's kind of its own logic, starts to creep into the other features, and then it becomes kind of a scene. Um, so that's the way I like to work. It's an inefficient way. It's always a trade-off between like a planning versus adventure. And I like the adventure.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Same.
like the adventure a lot. So, but it's also kind of like, oh my God, I've painted over this thing 4 times, or at least I've painted over it translucently so much that like you can't appreciate the earlier layers. So you might as well, but I like to leave at least some level of translucency so that like if you get up close under a lot of light, you can still see pretty much everything that's ever happened, but just to a lesser degree.
Yeah. Yeah, I love the like subtractive method that you use, right? You're using like a lot of like tools into wet paint. Is that
Exactly.
correct?
Yeah.
Nice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Super
Yeah.
rad.
I use a ton of like the golden glazing medium, or sometimes open, which is the same thing, but it's got like a retarder mixed into it that gives it a longer working time.
Right.
And it's really wonderful stuff. And my philosophy is like, use it like I'm trying to use it up. Like the bottle's going to expire tomorrow, so just get really loose with it. and yeah, so and then I just do that again and again in layers. Yep. And whether it's a semi-opaque glaze or a color glaze, I just start tooling around in it with the rubber tools.
Yeah. So. I love those things. I think that they kind of give like especially the one that it's like toothed, right? But it's the gaps in between it, or like the width of the scrape, I guess, on each one is like the Fibonacci sequence, or like the phi ratio, golden ratio.
Oh, yeah, I haven't tried that one yet. Yeah, where it's like a graduated home.
Yeah. It's really good for like early compositional stuff, and with the style that you paint in, and I pretty much mostly paint that way too, just sort of making a mess and kind of like pulling things out and seeing what happens. It's really good for that in terms of just composition. I feel like if you can get like a swift kind of like turn or stroke in certain spots, you can start building composition and form and see what comes out from there.
And I like to keep my surface kind of smooth, so mainly for like the undo function, which, after working in Photoshop for years, I kind of like, it just changes how you approach maneuvers. And so like if the underlayer is like well cured and dry, it's really tough, and you can go and do a bunch of stuff, and then you've got however long it takes for that to dry in your environment to decide whether you want to keep what you just did over the last 25 minutes, and a lot of times I'm like, yeah, it's just too busy, whatever. And I'll just like spray it down and wipe it off, and then no harm, no foul.
Right. Yeah. Do you feel like painting in this kind of way? I don't know how to phrase this without without it sounding weird, but in a way to me it seems more like authentic in terms of like, this is the moment that I started painting, and what comes out of this is like more direct, and rather than like kind of imposing an image onto something. I think there's pros and cons for each, but
are you saying like freestyling versus planned approach?
Yeah.
Or are you talking about like digital versus analog medium?
Oh, no. Freestyle versus planned.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I went through a period kind of in the college years of like doing really abstract expressionistic stuff. I was super into Richard Diebenkorn.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of approach to, compositional balance and movement and kind of rethinking things and blasting over stuff, and this kind of, his very like muscular work from the late 50s was my favorite.
What's his name?
Richard Diebenkorn. He's best known for his like later work when he was like in his 60s and 70s, which was very quiet, geometrical seascape kind of stuff. But his earlier work was really, really cool. And so I guess my point is like, I still like to have the satisfaction of that the composition, even if it's representative or even if it's really like psychedelically busy, it still works as an abstract expressionistic piece.
Yeah.
In terms of the balance of forms and where the action is and where the drama is and the angles and the movement and the color dynamics and all that. Like I still want it to be interesting as a painting,
right? Not just as
a technical, like, oh, I get it, it's a lion, or
Right.
So,
yeah. Well, yeah, that's super interesting. Like the way that you paint, I find it really cool. Maybe we could talk about just like how you got your start into making art and making paintings. Were you making paintings from like the time you were a kid?
Yeah, a little bit. I didn't really get into painting until I was like maybe 13, 14.
Mm-hmm.
I always drew and I still draw, and just always really enjoyed it. And then started to play around more with watercolors and a little bit of acrylic when I was like 13 or so. And then 14, had an oil painting class in high school and liked that. And then my parents knew a local painter who was trained in a classical way, who did figure drawing and figure painting at his studio here in Salt Lake. And I just started going to those things and learning how to do, proper drawing and proper painting. And his technique was a very sort of pared down, not minimalistic, but you could tell he was classically trained, but he was such a spare person in terms of like, his name was Earl Jones, great painter. He's still around. And he just had a very deft, economical way of getting things right the first time, often with the underpainting. And then using glazes, usually like with liquin as the medium, mm-hmm. to allow the brilliance of the canvas, the gesso, to come through in a lot of cases. And I just always appreciated his like freshness and luminosity. And I've tried to maintain that kind of level of chromatic glow that I like in his work.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I started learning pretty early, 14, 15, I got pretty into it, and had some time during those years to like go and geek out in museums a lot and really kind of get up close to paintings and just try to figure out how they were made and what the approach was and which things were done first. And I still like that. Like in a way, I'm kind of hoping, other people will come up to my work and get up really close and have the same kind of satisfaction that I took from some of those pieces.
Yeah.
So I guess after the teen years with the high school art teachers, and then the separate work with Earl Jones, Then I went to the University of Utah art department, did painting and drawing. And they still had a pretty strong like figurative tradition. The guy that had taught Earl Jones, Alvin Gittins, was like a Royal Academy trained portraitist.
Nice.
Who did a lot of famous people. And so there was still the legacy among a lot of the, even though he had died like in the early 80s, a lot of the people that he had trained that had become graduate students or whatever were still around teaching. And so there was still a lot of that approach. But it was changing in all the, the 90s postmodern. I don't know. It was a messy time.
Yeah.
It was just a weird time. I now looking back, I think the stuff that I was doing privately in my own apartment was like a lot more akin to what I'm doing now and was really like just more authentic. But at the time it was like, there was just all this sort of like early 90s deconstructive posturing and I don't know. I kind of got lost there for a while. It took me a while to kind of get back into my own jam.
Yeah. Were you just trying to follow like the trend of the time? Did you get caught up in that kind of a thing? Or?
Yeah, it just felt like, I had briefly kind of a mentor that I stayed in touch with, David Amico, who was in the LA art scene, and he's still, I think, doing stuff down there, and he's influenced a lot of people who I really admire, and I really like his work too. But it definitely was way more LA, way more kind of postmodern, deconstructed, make your own narrative kind of stuff. And so, even though I think I learned a lot from like things about how maybe the art world works or what people will be willing to consider in the established art market, especially at the higher echelons. I was, I got some really good feedback and some good training there, but I think it also continued to kind of push me off my own native qualities. Because I think, like psychedelic art is still kind of outre and still a little forbidden and still a little bit kind of dismissed, along with the entire topic of psychedelic medicine for that matter and other uses. But it's coming around.
Why do you think is?
Especially
in the art world in particular. You think it scares people with money away or something like that?
I mean, I don't know if you follow. There's an Instagram. What's it called? It's Jerry Gagosian.
Yes.
Yes. And I, like there's a lot of truth in those memes because, to a large extent, it's not about the art. It's about
Oh, sorry about that.
Recording in progress.
Sorry.
I guess it dropped the recording there for a second, but I think we're back on.
Yes. I'm really sorry about that.
It's all good.
Yeah. Sorry, but we were talking about Jerry Gagosian and
so why does the mainstream art market dismiss psychedelic art out of hand? I mean, it doesn't fit very well into that paradigm of, flipping and hot items and trendiness and hype. It's very much more of it's very operator dependent. It's very subjective. It's very mythopoetic. It often requires a level of craftsmanship and innovation that isn't very amenable to those other kinds of ways of doing things.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's quite a list. I could probably go on.
Yeah. So this kind of leads into a question I often ask people is, what are some like brutal facts that you've learned about the art world as you've been painting all these years?
That most people are basic as fuck. and they don't even have a framework to appreciate like innovation or originality or exploratory styles or exploratory thinking or exploratory themes or mythopoetic anything. And I just kind of at this point sort of shrug and go, well, yeah, like this isn't for everybody. I'm not trying to be a crowd pleaser, and maybe to my own detriment. But like, I just kind of got my jam and let the pieces fall where they may. And part of that is like, I worked for like 10, 11 years doing freelance product design. For mostly the collectibles industry, and also like, tags and packaging designs. So a lot of it was like licensed merchandise for, Batman stuff. And so it'd be like, okay, we need a Batman cookie jar and a mug and a lava lamp and a water globe and a salt and pepper set and bookends. And then you'd go through the motifs and figure out which motifs would be amenable to which things and which stuff appeals and how to make it producible, and then make all the technical art so that the sculptors could make it and yada, yada. And did that just like, thousands of times. And it was pretty gravy work before the whole industry kind of dried up and blew off to China.
Yeah.
Which was where it was being produced anyway. But yeah, it was, kind of sitting in that mainstream mindset, and kind of cursing myself for misusing my dreams and my talents and my interests. Yeah, it was, it just has a different, you come to sort of say, oh, okay, well, the mass, where's your niche in these masses? And
yeah,
I clearly don't want to be like in that category of like, that cookie jar was so great.
Yeah, right.
and there are people that are like genuine cookie jar enthusiasts,
right,
who maniacally, collect and trade that stuff. And it's like, okay, well, that's your jam.
Yeah.
But it's not me.
Well, that's cool. Well, the cool thing about like the internet, right, is that those two things can coexist at the same time. Like the people who are crazy about the kind of like weird art that, you and I and our friends make can have their like, they can be like maniacal and crazy and awesome, supporters about it. And then, have the cookie jar people on eBay, like going ham in their own lane.
Yeah. Yeah. And they do.
Yeah. That's wild.
Yeah, I've looked up like the resale prices on some of these things. It's like, oh damn, I guess I should have held on to my samples, but okay.
Yeah. Are they fetching about as much as a painting or something like that?
I mean, some of them, yeah. It's like depends on the thing, but some of them, we used to laugh. It was like, oh, these are collectibles, and then it's like, future landfill, but then like some of them genuinely are, and some of these things is like, what, $250 for that little box? Okay, well,
it's so interesting. The things that people,
but at least I didn't have to store it for decades,
Yeah, totally. So I want to talk about, we were talking on the phone a couple of weeks ago, and you were telling me that you have like kind of an outline for a novel that you're planning on writing. Am I getting that right? Or was it just a book?
You are getting that right. Okay. Yeah. I mean, it's, the hope is that it's a movie. Okay. I need to kind of get it together in a book format that would be amenable to, converting to a graphic novel and or screenplay format kind of thing. So, it's a science fiction, or more properly, like a speculative fiction, story. Nice. That is set in the future about 150 years. This is where my elevator pitch should come in, which I'm still working on. but basically it's, there's a love story. This young woman and her fiance live on this island, which is well, let me back up and say what my influences are on why I wanted to tell this story.
Yeah.
which is basically like a lot of climate grief, which I think anybody that's informed is experiencing.
Yeah.
And kind of also during the Trump years, this kind of despair over the ability of people to coordinate in any useful, meaningful, sustainable fashion to solve the problems which we have put into play. And so it was really, the story builds on Aldous Huxley's Island. And I don't know if you've ever read that, but it's basically his version of a utopian novel, that takes place maybe somewhere in Indonesia, with this hypothetical kingdom that is able to cherry pick the best of traditional culture and the best of technological culture, and they have this astoundingly great, harmonious psychedelic culture, which is being predated upon by the neighboring countries who covet the oil contracts and so forth. And so there's this intrigue around, this guy as he comes to fall in love with this utopian culture at the same time that he's actually an agent, basically planning and plotting to destroy it and sell it off. So the story in my mind was like, okay, well, what if there weren't hostile competitors waiting over the horizon to plunder everything? What if that was already all taken care of? What if this psychedelic island utopia was all that was left of humanity? And they had to make a go of it, under these new conditions that were actually very strict. And then you say, well, what happened to the rest of all the people? What happened to the 9 billion people at year 2060 or whatever that were around? And that kind of builds on an Aldous Huxley Brave New World scenario, in which basically, with all of the upheaval, people end up going to these, places where they can get better food, medicine, entertainment, care, and socialization and therapy than they could get anywhere else. But the condition is that they don't breed, and then they, as that generation dies off, that takes care of the population issue. But that's kind of the backstory that you don't learn until later. So in the story, and also I've been reading a lot of Margaret Atwood, her Oryx and Crake trilogy, which I don't know if you're familiar with, but it's very dark, but it's also kind of in the vein of speculative fiction and massive depopulation. And so kind of trying to ride on her shoulders, but without quite the sinister, dark, cynical, it's more of a utopian, it's a true utopian thing.
Yeah.
And even going back and reading the original Utopia by Thomas More, which was written in 1515, that was very instructive. And a lot of the features of the Utopia of Thomas More are strong features in the social organization for this hypothetical situation in the future on this island.
Yeah.
So it's a love story. And, this young woman and her fiance are from neighboring valleys, and there's some discord because my fiance's relatives had been up as a rule. He's really eager to make good with his family's name, and make good with their honor. And meanwhile, his fiance Lily is from a more prominent family. Her mother was a senator who was actually involved with the human sacrifice portion of that. And then she discovers some forbidden item. They're basically deindustrialized and living in a kind of a neo-tribal utopia that is overseen by this angel, basically. And she discovers some forbidden knowledge, and she starts asking too many questions, and the society starts to fall apart, and the Civil War develops, and then I can't tell you the rest because you got to watch the show.
Yeah. Nice.
But as things collapse, she learns the backstory of how this all went down and how this came about. And that's actually the most interesting part. So
Yeah. Nice.
The interpersonal drama is actually like the weakest part. It's like the thing I've been stalling on the most.
Yeah.
On this whole thing, because I've been really enthralled with the backstory of how to make this whole thing kind of semi-plausible.
Yeah. That's rad. So a few questions off of that. What do you think about the possibility of like our world actually achieving something close to a utopia? And kind of like an adjacent question is, what do you think about like predictive programming in media in terms of like planting stories in people's heads and then they are more likely to come true? Can you hear me?
Hold on. Our connection just slowed down a little. I couldn't hear the last part of the question. Say that again.
The second kind of question is, what do you think about predictive programming? And for people who don't kind of know what that is, it's sort of like
it's doing it again. Hold on.
Dang it.
Let me turn my Wi-Fi. Let me turn my Wi-Fi off. Okay, hopefully that'll improve our connection speed here.
Okay.
Sorry, go ahead.
I'll just ask the question over again. And so what do you I'll just do one question at a time, so it'll make it easier. What do you think about the likelihood of our world actually achieving something like a utopia?
I think it's exceedingly unlikely. I love reading, and some books that really made a big impact on me were those of Noah Yuval Harari. He wrote Sapiens and Homo Deus and 21 Lessons for the 21st Century. And he's like basically a military historian, and he's looking at like what were the evolutionary factors that caused humans to be this unique neurotic ape that we are, and what are we really evolved to be and do. And then the next book was like, now you give these godlike powers to this neurotic ape and watch what happens. Ooh, that's interesting and kind of scary. And then the next one is like, okay, now with AI and all this, like, do we lose our status as like top apex species? And is that a bad thing, or were we always a poor candidate for apex species anyway because we're these neurotic apes? Mm-hmm. And so, he basically says we're not, we're really evolved to deal with coordinating and, we're evolved for about maybe 100 to a couple hundred people in terms of keeping track of our relationships intimately. And if you add in social fictions like religion that allows strangers to communicate better, you can go into the thousands or even millions with that. But when you're talking about billions of people trying to make coordinated, rational decisions at a time when we've run out of time to make errors. I think the chance of that happening on our own is fairly close to zero. And part of this, like the story that I've been developing is like, well, okay, like if you endowed an AI with the right kind of value system to make these kind of executive decisions in a compassionate and wise way, and said, okay, now go save the biosphere and like, don't kill anybody.
Yeah.
What kind of utopia would it make?
Right.
And yeah, I don't think humans are up to the task of making a utopia. It's doubtful that an AI is either, but like, I think we have to invent a tool, maybe the saving grace is that humans, even though we're not really adapted to do anything except adapt, we are exceptionally good at making tools that can do things that we couldn't do with our meat suit.
Right.
And I think a meta problem solving thing like a super potent AI is maybe our only hope at this point.
Right on. I'm kind of in the same boat. I think like, I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen, but it doesn't seem like we can keep going at this pace for very much longer without some like truly world changing events happening. But also I wanted to ask you, with like writing this book, do you ever think about predictive programming in stories, media, novels, all those things? Um, whereas like, just to explain it to people listening who might not know what I'm talking about, it's where the stories that we've been telling ourselves through novels and media throughout the years have sort of influenced the outcome of reality because they're so like deeply ingrained in people's subconscious. Did that ever cross your mind while getting into the story?
Yeah, that's like kind of the hope is like, um, that if it doesn't work on people, yeah, I mean, yeah, I definitely would like to add my contribution to the collective cultural dialogue about concerns, hopes, and possible solutions.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe when I get the whole manuscript done, it'll be on Google Docs, and the Google bots will be like, "Ooh, check this one out.
Yeah.
Like this is maybe the most plausible scenario. Let's go with that." And I mean, but it's silly, but it's kind of like, yeah. I feel like I've brought to bear on this question like pretty much as many interests and at least somewhat plausible means in which it could occur.
Yeah.
And I don't know. It's a very radical story. I think
Sure.
It's like the most ridiculous lefty fever dream ever, but especially if you go into like the nuts and bolts of like what made Thomas More's Utopia run. It's kind of close actually. So, I mean, yeah, I like it to be my cultural contribution in addition to like whatever I leave behind as artwork.
Yeah. Yeah. I think at this point, like people who want to help and also be creative or, use their talents to help are just sort of like throwing shit against the wall and seeing what sticks. Right. Like, aside from being like a climate activist, I don't know what to do, like I guess I'm just like, I guess I'll just keep making art, keep doing this podcast and hope that like it inspires someone. But I think it's kind of naive to, think that like my art is going to save the world, but at the same time, it's like this paradox because the world would be different without, anyone's contribution to it, good or bad.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we definitely are like creativity animals.
Yeah.
And it takes a lot of creativity, most of which is irrelevant and useless, to keep that kind of a process going. But that out of all the bazillions of things that get flung against the wall, some of it does stick and some of it sticks exceedingly well.
Right. Yeah.
And, cements into place and becomes a foothold for a whole new level of stuff. Like that's how it works.
Yeah.
So, I think we shouldn't judge ourselves or one another by like what's sticking or not. I think it's just like, well, just like show up, do your work, you do it with integrity and some love and passion and see if it sticks. And
totally.
I think there was like Allen Ginsberg was like, this is my job is to play the fool.
Yeah.
It's kind of like it doesn't have to be good. It doesn't have to be redeeming. It's just like you just get out there and you do stuff that's foolish, and some of it turns out to not be foolish. And you can't tell until you have that hindsight. You can't tell where that foolishness was or was not.
Yeah.
You just do your thing.
Yeah. Yeah. When people talk about the muse or like whenever they feel inspired, I think it's just important to do the work enough to where you're more likely to be around your medium when inspiration does strike, right? Like, so if you're writing all the time, say,
Mm-hmm.
and then
Hold on, we got another delay here. I'll wait for it to clear up.
all right, pardon the technical difficulties, everyone. We're back. So I remember what we were talking about because I made a point to, but I think it was about inspiration striking versus just being kind of in front of the canvas or in front of, whatever medium you're working with, right? And how it's just important to just do the work, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think you have to be inspired. I think if you wait to be inspired, you miss out on a lot of productivity time. I mean, it's better to be inspired and like whatever you need to do to like cultivate that, like amen to that. But like, yeah, sometimes it's just kind of like, well, I can, I can spend 18 minutes doing this little thing, like, and then I got to go, or that I'm too tired, but like you just show up and make something.
Yeah. And, like one of the best ways I've found to get inspired is to just like push through when you're like, I don't know if I want to paint, or I don't know if I want, and you just like kind of discipline yourself to sit down and just go through it. And once you punch through and you find this flow state, just inspiration just starts pouring in. That's what I've found, at least.
Yeah. But I mean, the inspiration part's more fun. I mean, if you can get that, but it doesn't always show up, and it kind of depends on the modality too. Like if it's like heavy on the improv, the inspiration is indispensable. But if it's just kind of like, well, I got to finish, redoing these hands. Hands are hard.
Yeah.
You just kind of keep chipping at it until you get it looking better. So yeah.
Totally. Oh yeah, I wanted to ask you this question. Do you feel like you think in words or in images more?
I'm a very visually oriented person. Most of my sensory input is visual, but like, and I handle words okay. But I tend to think in terms of like just concepts as though they're like insights or something.
Mm-hmm.
And not so much about like, I'm not the kind of person that has like a narrative, like a narrator in my mind, maybe to a fault. But
that must be nice. Well, yeah, I don't know if I like narrate things, but I feel like I think in words more, which is kind of weird that I've chosen, or maybe it chose me, like painting to express myself with.
Mm-hmm.
And then sometimes even the words don't really come out right. So
yeah.
I don't know. Maybe it's about 50-50 where like sometimes I'll see things that I want to say and it's hard to say them, but a lot of times I'm like trying to craft, what I sort of hear as words into an image.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, well, I tend to drift out into like these realms that are definitely nonverbal or even kind of anti-verbal. Sometimes it's a nice, clean, tidy narrative, but not very often. Usually it's just kind of like this suggestive space made out of suggestive stuff and, just a different modality,
Yeah.
Words have their range, and then there's all this other stuff that exists outside of that range.
Yeah. Yeah, this kind of gets back into the area of like archetypes that I wanted to go, I think, more deeply on. But again, it's that sort of liminal space where like words can hardly touch what the thing really is, and I think that's why we paint those things.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's like that unexplicable like shadow side of yourself. Like with those dark Madonna images, that's kind of what I see there as this sort of like the inverse of like your psyche, I guess, Would you say that's
Yeah,
like
I mean,
kind of about right, or?
yeah, because I mean, there is, if someone's like, well, what are you trying to say with this painting? It's like, I'm painting this because there isn't a way to say that. And it's just this like thing that sucks you into this quasi-erotic, mysterious, kind of numinous, dominous, whatever. And
Newman Doom.
yeah. Yeah. And that's, there isn't a vocabulary for that I'm aware of. I mean, I think there's poetry. I think poetry can evoke those kinds of spaces and even more.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't write a lot of poetry. I do sometimes.
Yeah.
I like it.
Yeah, and maybe this, and again, just to like do a little callback here, maybe this is why the sort of contemporary art world rejects these things, because you can't really bullshit about them. You can't like.
Yeah, I think sincerity. Yeah, the sincerity is kind of a toxic characteristic in a lot of these like economic modalities, where it's like, no, this isn't about like being honest. This is this whole hype machine thing that like, yeah, and it's like, oh, guess I'm not like, wait, how do I sell this shit then?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Do you know who Jerry Gagosian is? I mean, I know like who like what Gagosian is, right? It's a big collector in like the contemporary art world.
Yeah. Is Larry Gagosian.
Right.
Is like this ultra blue chip art dealer forever. And yeah. And so, and people that operate in that sphere, that it's a whole, it's an art form, I guess, in its own devious, like
Machiavellian
craft
kind of way.
It's very Machiavellian. It's very, but it is a craft. It's an art form. And some people learn to get their creative dopamine fix from playing that game. I don't. Mm-hmm. I wish I did.
Yeah, right.
Maybe I can learn to. It's an acquired taste, but yeah, at this point, it's just kind of like, I don't know. Yeah,
you probably need to buy a few cause paintings or something.
Yeah,
and try flipping them out.
Right. Yeah, cause seems to be the low hanging fruit that everyone likes to use as a punching bag. I don't know. I'm not going to bag on anybody's art. But
I'm not bagging on his art. I'm just saying that like I actually love Cause's stuff. But like that's like the quintessential thing that you would buy if you're gonna just flip it, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So,
Am I talking too much shit? Should we?
I mean, well, I don't know. I mean, yeah, but I don't like to get like into a cynical space because I'm already there a lot.
Right. Let's go back to some safer territory. What are some what's your routine like? To whether it's like to get prepared for painting or writing or just to have a day doing whatever it is you do you have like a typical day? Do you have like, is it very scheduled? Or go ahead.
I almost never have a typical day except for like going to the gym in the morning sometime usually.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's just too many parts in movement around here. So I usually get my art fix in the evenings, like late evenings.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it's just kind of like, oh, okay, it's more of like, if I can schedule it, I will definitely schedule it and be like, sorry, I'm going to be unavailable that entire afternoon or whatever. But like, usually it's just kind of like, okay, now no one's bugging me. I'm going to go in the studio until I like can't move anymore and just get some stuff done. And then when I'm starting to slow down, it's like, oh, okay, go to bed. Like, you're not doing anything. Go to bed.
Yeah. What's your overall take on, I mean, this is such a broad question. I just kind of like putting people on the spot with it. But what's your overall take on consciousness, or where do you think that like ideas come from?
I mean, I'm coming to think that there is a field of consciousness, kind of the mind at large, like Huxley was saying.
Mm-hmm.
But, if that's the case, then we're really like pretty inefficient antennas for that and transmitters. Because I think there would be like way more like psychic traffic if that were the case. But I think that there is that, and even if it's some sort of subtle thing that happens at some quantum entanglement level that we can just barely perceive if conditions are right. I mean, it's still, there's enough like paranormal research and things that seem to support that there's some measurable effect there, and that would imply that there's some kind of field we're participating in.
Yeah.
But I think, by and large, the vast bulk of everything that we're perceiving and thinking is we're just sort of swimming in this thought swarm that's being stored, modified, and transmitted by brains and words and other media. And I think that's where most of it happens.
Yeah.
Although I was just learning a little bit about I forget the astronomical term for it, but basically there's like, you have like a solar time where the sun is relative to the earth. And then you've got like a galactic time where the earth's rotation is relative to, like, let's say the galactic center.
Mm-hmm.
And that there are certain times, what do they call it? It's not meridianal time. They call it, it'll come to me in a second. But anyway, there are certain times of day in the galactic sense when the Earth is basically facing away from the galactic center, where if you're trying to do paranormal research or remote viewing, your chance of getting useful, correct data is about 350% better. So, and it seems to have to do with like getting away from the noise of the galactic center and into the quiet sort of spaciousness of out there. I think that's a pretty interesting phenomenon.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
So I consciousness is, I think it's kind of like philosophy, where I think rather than really gaining an understanding of what it is, like in philosophy, it's just like a history of people like arguing with one another's definitions and shooting down their ideas.
Right. Yeah.
I think consciousness studies also has that kind of pitfall, where, then it's like, well, wait, what are you talking? Are you talking about thoughts, or are you talking about impressions, or are you talking about the actual information transfer or correct guesses, or like, any one of those and more could be the topic of discussion for what someone thinks they're talking about with consciousness. But, people are going to have different definitions and different parameters for assessing what's true.
Yeah. It's such a weird thing to like turn the mind or even the brain in on itself and try and grok what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
It's like we understand all these things about like our external reality, but we don't really understand all that much about how it is that we're able to even perceive that external reality, and that like why we have this like sense of self. Or I mean, I guess they do know that it's more like a survival thing for the organism, right? But it's just it's such a crazy knotted up topic, and that's why I like asking that question, because it usually sparks some very interesting answers. Like, you're talking about remote viewing and like psychic phenomenon. That kind of makes me wonder, do you still use psychedelics on any sort of regular basis, or did you like hang up the phone like Alan Watts kind of talked about?
No, I love the phone.
Yeah. Nice.
Yeah, I love Alan Watts's phone, and it's a very useful tool. and it's a very interesting topic I've been interested in since my very early years, and know quite a bit about it, just from having studied the whole topic for years, and then also with Sonny's work in psychedelic assisted therapy. Like there's this, outside of the kind of recreational or artistic realm of that, there is, a huge underappreciated therapeutic set of modalities that can be used to great effect in terms of healing and wholeness and integration and de-traumatization and creativity. So, I don't really go on public record about Alan Watts's phone, but we've had some great calls.
Nice.
And but kind of back to the topic of consciousness, in super inspired states of mind, there is this thing of when you get to this transcendent place beyond time where everything is already accomplished and everything is all, full information, full attainment, what Aristotle would call the entelechy. You see that there's two main components to that. I don't know if you've ever seen, I'm sure you've seen fractal animations where there's a Mandelbrot set or some other thing, and it's got its spiral architecture, and then there'll be these either waves surging into the space or waves surging out of the space. And I think it's constructive to use that as sort of a metaphor for what life is trying to do, being the waves that are approaching from a general sense and becoming more and more specific into these finer and finer branching details of what ends up being the fractal structure. And so in esoteric science, they say, well, what's God? And they say, well, God is pressure. And that's a kind of an interesting metaphor to look at the why and the, if you look at any force greater than human agency in the classic kind of archetypal sense, those have been the gods. And so you've got, a lightning god and a rain god and an earthquake god and all these other things that this entire pantheon of all these forces greater than humans or forces within humans that they don't quite know how to manage or master.
Right.
If you look at each of those as a kind of pressure that's trying to do its own thing in the big jam session of reality, then you could look at that as these waves that are these different kinds of pressures that are moving into the opportunities that present that for action. And when conditions are right and things aren't breaking down or contaminated or warped or whatever, those balanced forces end up becoming this surging, completing force that does the universe's work. But it's also important to look at the other side of that, which is the fractal architecture of the thing. That's the attractor. It's the attractor. And so, when you get into this hyperconscious state of well, what's consciousness and what's it for and what's it doing? You can get to that point where you start to grasp the final edge of the entire structure as the attractor. And you're oh my God, it's all done. It's all perfect. It's all coming. It's all arriving. And so when you get into this inspired state and you're trying to create a work of art or you're trying to create a story like the one I've been working on, it's almost kind of if you can get your energy level up enough, you can just sort of stick your head into it and then just try to notice and remember as much as you can. And then you come back and you get to work. And that's a glorious, rare state of mind, but it's a really beautiful, divine one. And, I'd say that, thanks, Alan Watts, for the calling card.
That's a nice way to say it. Yeah. I'm right there with you. Solid state of the center of everything is sort of what I, sometimes that I've been on phone calls. That's sort of how I describe that space that you're talking about. That's already it's already happened but now it's just taking, it's like just, as Terence McKenna said in one of his speeches, it's going through the, my brain's not working well today, but it's going through, it's like just,
didn't he call it like the historical attractor at the end of time or something like that?
Yeah, there's the eschaton, right? And then like reality is taking potential from that realm and occurring, just like going through the formal process of happening, but it's all already like happened. And as you're saying, in that like kind of completed fractal state, right? I call it, well, the thing that I came away from, trying to word that space was like just the solid state light hard drive of the center of the universe. Yeah, now we're just waxing poetic over here, but I really appreciate you like breaking all that down in such a metaphorical way. I'm glad we could use Alan Watts, our good buddy, to sort of stay on the public record, but not, right?
Right. Yeah, he was a great mind and a great writer.
Yeah. So you mentioned Margaret Atwood as someone you've been reading recently, and Aldous Huxley. Who are some other influences? I mean, they can be painters, they can be novelists, they can be whoever from any medium that have influenced the work that you do.
I mean, I would say like music informs my aesthetic a lot, and probably the musical artist that liberated me the most from my kind of stuck non-psychedelic hiatus that lasted for like 10, 15 years was Hammond Tobin.
Oh, nice.
And
big fan.
Yeah, like, yeah. I mean, and that stuff was being made at that time was just like, whoa, this is, yeah, it was life-changing. It really was. And so I'm still super into the out there electronica. Some of my stuff I've been listening to a lot lately is Shapeshift, I really like. Hullabaloo, kind
nice.
Of the neuro hyphy, whatever you want to call that. Just like really dense, complex beats and a lot of dynamism.
Nice. You like Mr. Bill? You know Mr. Bill?
Yeah.
One of my faves. I had him on the podcast. It was pretty cool, pretty fun.
Yeah, I listened to it. Yeah, it was good.
Nice. He also has his own podcast. I'll just plug that a little bit. But yeah, I love all that shit. And so, do you paint? Do you still live paint a lot? Do you go to festivals or anything like that very much anymore?
I mean, I haven't done that since the COVID period began. I would like to get back to it. I really enjoy it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the last one I did was like a big Bass Nectar show. And I think I was like the oldest person in the building, like older than all the cops and even the organizers, probably older than the people that actually owned the building. It was it's kind of like, whoa, but hey, whatever,
No, that's cool. No, I'm starting to feel that way sometimes. I don't know how old you are, but I just turned 36. And I think the average age of people going to shows of the music that we like is like somewhere between like 18 and 30. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And but that doesn't really matter, I guess, as long as you're just having fun doing what you love.
Yeah, I mean, fortunately, I think we're kind of in a more tolerant cultural time, where people are just. It's like, okay, well, put your money where your mouth is with all this diversity and divergent stuff. And it's like, yeah, I'm fucking old.
Yeah.
And,
yeah.
And I'm into the same thing here. So whatever,
Mm-hmm.
I've been doing this shit since 1984. So
Nice. Do you have any just off the top crazy festival stories that you'd like to share?
I mean,
Or maybe like the craziest thing someone's ever said to you at a festival about your art, if that frames it a little better.
Well, I had a guy, I was like painting on the painting, and he was like, "Did you paint this?"
Oh, classic.
I'm like,
just classic.
Kinda. And then, and his next question was like, "Are you a cop?" And then I said no, and he's like, do you want to take this? And he hands me some mystery pill. I'm like, I'm good, dude.
Yeah.
You stop touching me. So, I mean, I don't know. I don't go like to gonzo at festivals or anything. So I like to stay functional.
Sure.
But, and I mean, I don't know, there's just so many, like, how do you even say, well, like, what was the most gonzo thing you saw today at Burning Man?
Right.
And then you're doing that like day after day after day. And after a while, it's like, was that even remarkable? Like,
right.
That guy licking her armpit for an ice cream bar, was that even like, does that go in my memory bank or like, or whatever? It's just kind of like, there's just like a lot of different strokes for different folks.
Yeah.
I don't have like too many horror stories, thank God. I mean, they exist, but yeah.
Are you experienced in like harm reduction, things like that at events?
I mean, I haven't like participated in that. I'm aware of like things like Zendo and other harm reduction things, and I'm fully in support of that entire philosophy and process, and the people that do that are doing a great service to the world, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, shouts to them for sure.
For sure. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. I haven't done anything with them personally, but we had to take my friend there one time, and they informed me that it's always good if someone's freaking out, to kind of just let them have their space as well. Like, you don't want to put too many words into their consciousness, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
If you can just, like you were saying, get them to sort of like lay down and breathe. That seems to be like a move, maybe not always the move, but like a good thing to remember. So I guess a little PSA, a little sidetrack there for anyone listening.
Mm-hmm. Don't get puddled.
Don't get puddled. Yeah, that's great. So let's see. I already asked you the question about who your influences were, right? Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or at least my early influences, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Are you are you mostly just writing now, or are you making paintings still?
Yeah, pretty much now when I've got the time to do creative work, I'm working on the story. I've been working on it pretty consistently for like the last year.
Nice.
It actually, the inspiration of it started like right after COVID, like when the lockdown went into effect, and people were speculating of like, where is this coming from? We shouldn't be messing with these like undisturbed habitats and like contacting these species that we wouldn't ordinarily have contact with, blah, blah, blah. And that was actually kind of the weird roundabout inspiration for the story, was like, it was this idea that maybe, these mega organisms of fungus that live in the soil that can function kind of like a neural network in some ways. What if these plagues were like being cooked up by this like mega consciousness in the ground, and then released through different species as a way of like the fungus, like as a self-preservative mechanism.
Yeah.
and then, maybe there was like some sort of psychic interface with insects, like leafcutter ants or whatever, that could like, make this bridge to like basically transmit the message to people that they better like get their shit together and stop destroying the earth, or a whole flood of these like new plagues would like erupt and do the work for us.
Yeah.
And that was kind of a crude, not very plausible beginning to the story. And then it was just like, well, no, and it's like, I'm really more of a nonfiction person. So like things that are implausible always bother me. And I'm always looking for like a more like practical solution to how to attain this premise or condition.
Sure.
And so that, working from like, if there were some force that was insisting that humans stop destroying the earth and get their shit together and fix the damage and live right, what would that be? What would it look like? How would it come about? What are the plausible means in which some condition like that could be satisfied? And then it all just started to kind of write itself.
Nice.
So
nice. Do you what do you think about, I don't know why what you just said made me think of this, but what do you think about all the like UFO stuff coming out from like official channels like the Pentagon? What's your take on that? Do you think it's us? Do you think it's just some sort of like strange?
I mean, I've actually seen UFO type phenomena. I mean, I've seen a silver egg like thing that was kind of hard to judge how far away it was. I've seen triangular dark things, and I've also seen like the classic geometrical lights where they kind of fly in, or if they're even flying, if they're even objects. We still don't like, everyone talks about it like it's an object for sure, and all we have are these like optical phenomena to say, well, it looks like an object, so it's an object. And I've watched these things happen, and I've been with other people while it's happening, and that's, it's not a rare occurrence. People won't think you're crazy if you say you've seen that now, but like at the end of the day, it's like, what do you do with that?
Yeah.
It's like, especially when it starts to dominate the headlines, and it's like, ooh, drum roll, please. There's a new breaking story about like the government's knowledge about it. And then you see the story, and it's like, they just confirmed what like people have been talking about for like 30 years. Like
right.
Just the fact that they confirmed it like was there, like that's not new information. It's just slightly more believable information. But I guess, so my knee-jerk reaction, my cynic is like, well, it's a psyop of some sort. I don't know who the interested parties are or what exactly they're benefiting from this, but like, I can't do anything with that until they're like actually dropping super revolutionary, great technologies to like rescue us from almost certain destruction.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna like waste a lot of consciousness on it.
Yeah.
But when it's like, oh yeah, like, the Navy, has this new fusion drive that can like, create all this cool energy without having to use blah, blah, blah. And like, wouldn't that be nifty? And it's like, okay, well then fucking get on with it. Cause like we need that shit like yesterday.
Yes, yeah.
Come on.
Totally. Yeah. That's kind of my take too. I think like some of them might also be just some projection from like the collective unconscious.
Yeah. And Jung wrote about that. He has a whole book dedicated to the topic, and
big fan. I feel like that's like a pretty big chunk of reality. Is like you were saying, you kind of mentioned about like these forces that sort of control humans that like ancient people thought of as gods, right? And he called them the archetypes, but there's also like this sort of like, it's like the anomaly that happens every few thousand years where like the collective unconscious projects itself onto reality somehow, and we have these weird phenomenon. Like, I mean, like Bigfoot might be one, UFOs, all these paranormal things that like we can't really account for through like our conscious, like rational mind. And so it might as well just be that as much as it might be anything else.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of on the same topic of like the consciousness question you were asking earlier, like, well, is it a field?
Mm-hmm.
And for those of you out there that are like, interested in paranormal things, they might know of Rupert Sheldrake's work with the so-called morphogenetic fields, or the morphic fields, or also known as habit fields.
Mm-hmm.
And there is this documented sort of fringe phenomenon where, people will invent the same invention independently on the same day,
Mm-hmm.
apply for the patent on the same day, or famous examples of like unrelated populations of animals, like innovating the same thing, like washing their food, or figuring out how to, solve some problem. Even, well, the one that Sheldrake put up was like, okay, if you're a chemist and you've made a new chemical and it's never been crystallized before, oftentimes the crystallization process takes a really long time to start, because presumably this is a new there's no habit field for this thing yet.
There's no tracks. There's not a trail.
There's no probability track or trough, as he likes to describe it, for these things to settle into. But someone doing the exact same synthesis in ideal conditions will be able to crystallize that faster the next time. Mm-hmm. And again and again and again. And so it kind of points to this phenomenon of like, well, is there a probability field, or a possibility field, or a habit field, or a morphogenetic field that is making these innovations more likely over time? And one of the most interesting extensions of that idea that I've come across is there's an author named Dolores Cannon, who was she's dead now, but she worked for years as a hypnotherapist and was really good at getting people into these super deep trances where they could kind of unpack their traumas and their karmas in their past lives. But then she found that there was, beyond the past life analysis, there was a whole set of people that were kind of in the baby boomer age category that didn't seem to have Earth karma, weren't sure why they were here on Earth, felt really bewildered and disappointed by humanity and the difficulties of life on Earth, and wanted to know what that was all about. And as they dove deeper into this in separate sessions with separate people, they kind of came to this consensus that there had been, or at least she noticed a consensus of among these different subjects that she was treating, that there was a wave of volunteers. And she wrote a book about it called The New Earth and the new, I don't know. She wrote a whole bunch of books, Dolores Cannon, but the story that kind of emerged from multiple people's testimony, which I thought was super intriguing, and even if it's false, it's still a really cool story, was that basically, like, there are these mega angels that get life started on planets, and through a sustained hyper consciousness, which takes a tremendous amount of effort over billions of years, and then they, occasionally it works, and they kind of have these angels kind of lurk around out in space, kind of keeping an eye on things, and they call them the garden keepers. And they basically have this kind of Star Trek philosophy of non-interference. But apparently, like, after the invention of the nuclear bomb, they were like, oh shit, now these neurotic apes have nuclear weapons. And not only are they likely to blow up their own beautiful planet, which we've worked so hard on, but if they do that, it's going to go out in the habit field, the probability field, the morphogenetic field, and it's going to make that same disaster more likely and more frequent throughout the universe. And we can't let that happen. And so then they're like, well, hold the phone. Like, we're not supposed to go in there and just like zap people. And we can't play favorites. We're not cherry picking. And so then after some discussion, it was like, okay, well, let's just have more advanced souls from other systems come in and just chill the vibe. Like, these people, all they do is incarnate. They don't have to have human karma. They don't have to be here for any particular job. their job is just to show up and just be chill, and hopefully that'll be enough to cool off the Earth system enough that it doesn't self-destruct. And I think that's such an interesting idea.
Yeah.
And yeah. So
yeah. Well, that also brings me back to, there are stories of UFOs or UAPs or whatever the hell they're calling them now, where they'll go to nuke sites where they're storing warheads and just shut shit down. Like, it'll be like a big ball of light flying over, and all the red alerts will go up because it's a military base. But then like they just like make the nukes inoperable, and that's coming. I guess that's coming from like actual like top brass at the time at some of these bases, like coming straight from their mouth, which I find, I guess it's sort of interventionist, but it's kind of like this low key, just like, you don't know what this is, but here it is. And maybe it's just like, just to speculate and be wild here, but like, maybe it is how we perceive it is just sort of like this dumbed down, like, oh, look at the light, but it's like some,
and if you are dealing with like vastly more efficient technologies and vastly better intelligences with sensory apparatuses which are way beyond the scope and scale of our own, then we literally not only do we not know what we're talking about, we can't know what we're talking about.
Right.
And or what they're, or more importantly, we can't know what they're talking about. So we're just like ooga ooga and like, yeah, and they're just taking care of shit. Hopefully.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like that. So do you yourself believe in like past lives and reincarnation and stuff like that?
I mean, I've had a few kind of paranormal-ish things that were like, oh, well, that must have been like a shared lifetime or something. But like, it's not very specific, and the experiences have been kind of fleeting and not very useful on a practical level. So,
sure.
I mean, I'm open to that, and I think that if you're willing to accept consciousness as a field in which we participate and in which we can kind of read, write, and access, to varying degrees of accuracy. I think I definitely allow that as a philosophically.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. But if it's a talent, I totally suck at it.
Yeah. Yeah. Same here. Yeah. I'm just I'm as inclined to believe in that as nearly anything else. I feel like that it might just be like whatever a scientific rationalist might say, that it's just genetic memories that you're accessing. Because I also wonder if like you preserve any part of like yourself or like like the ego after you die.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of feel like you don't, like that you're just put back into this, you quote unquote, or just put back into this like flow state of swarming genes and consciousness, right? And then
if it's a gene swarm, it's also a consciousness swarm.
Yeah.
But then it's not a disorganized consciousness swarm. It's going to have different kind of emergent structures that we can only dimly imagine. So, there's probably modes of accessing the atomistic individual consciousness as it's sort of archived, or it could just, be this blended thing that's like participating in all kinds of stuff that we're unequipped to even identify.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, yeah, and I think art is to get back to the topic, the ostensible topic at hand. I think art is like us trying to reach an understanding of things that we might not ever understand rationally or consciously, right?
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, man, this has been a good talk, and yeah, I feel smart talking to you. I feel smarter. Um, and I'm looking forward to this book or maybe this TV show. We'll see how it goes, right?
Yeah, it keeps snowballing. It's probably going to be more like a series, or at least three main parts.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, it's kind of bad because it's like I'm still like putting the main pieces together, and I'm already thinking about like a sequel.
Nice.
And there's kind of there's a deviousness built into like, there's a lot of themes about like forbidden knowledge and transgression and whether or not to respect agency. And, the kind of the nature of arrogance in its most abstract sense in terms of like doing something without being asked.
Mm.
Just taking the initiative to do this thing. And then like, what's the force or the intelligence that's pushing that? And is it noble? Is it honorable?
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a whole lot of symbolism that like, there's Kabbalistic stuff and there's Adam and Eve stuff. And there's Book of Enoch figures really heavily in that, the old Book of Enoch from whatever, 200 or 300 BC, which is sort of non-canonical. I don't know. It's funny because I've always hated everything about religion and groupthink, and I've never had much of a stomach for anything biblical. And it's so ironic that I like this first thing that I'm writing is like completely about that. And it's just ironic.
Maybe it's you're like integrating all that information in a way that helps you like not resent it anymore or something.
Well, it's more of like seeing, sort of like, well, what's the useful architecture in this archetype?
Right.
Like it's not just this old book of stupid stories written by people that were even dumber than people are now. It's like,
yeah.
It may have started that way, but like then a lot of great minds keep like playing with it and thumbing through it and like speculating about this and reading all of this other stuff into it. And so what you get is this weird amalgam of like a dumb story with some really deep meaning that's like kind of awesome. And it's like,
yeah.
And to me, it's just like, it's a paradox,
Yeah. Do you think people are actually more stupid now than they were in the past in some ways?
No, actually, I think it's both. I mean, I think the divergence, like you've got even more amazingly stupid people now, but you've also got really amazingly well-informed, like great minds. It's there's probably some sort of like mathematical formula for this extreme divergence.
Some kind
so yeah, I think generally speaking, yeah, people are probably even dumber now than they were like 200 BC. But then the knowledge explosion has like made this little shiny edge of that like really interesting.
Yeah.
So
yeah, very nice. Well, yeah, I guess we'll wrap it up here. Do you have any advice for let's just go with general life advice, because we've talked about a lot of things that sort of like spiraled around art sometimes and just life in general as well. So yeah, if you have any advice.
Yeah, I had like a young starting out artist ask me a bunch of questions like on that theme of like what's the advice you would give to your 17-year-old self or whatever.
Right.
And and a lot of it has to do with just sort of like my own sort of psychological hangups or damage or hesitations, and but like I would say find a mentor, find several mentors in succession. Learn as much as you can. Don't be stingy with yourself about like getting educated or taking workshops or just trying stuff, getting out of your habit zones and getting into new techniques, to new mediums, new technologies, especially. I kind of, to my own detriment, I've kind of become even more Luddite than I was in my earlier years. And like, that's not helping me.
Right.
So I would say, what was like, there's some cynical Russian that was like, technology is everything and the rest of politics is window dressing.
Yeah.
And that's like a political one, but you could also say that about art, like where it's like, jump into the new tech, jump into the new mediums, make the tech work for you, because it's like, it's all about access and power tools. And, and if you've got a spark within you, that spark will shine brighter and bigger if you are using the tools properly. Nice. So I kind of regret that I haven't been more tech oriented. It's a really great time to be an artist, I think, because you can find what you're into a lot easier. Like back in the old days of fucking paper magazines and books, and like in my art school days, it was like, I exhausted like the special collections thing at the university library, and like I looked at every single interesting art book in the downtown library, and like I had collected as many interesting art books as I could find. And if I went to a new city, I'd always hit the Rizzoli or whatever and try to find something cool I hadn't seen. And I'd always hit like the art stands and look at the magazines and be flipping through like, four magazines or so. And like, maybe I'd see like two things that were like, oh my God, that's cool. And the rest of it was just like, oh God, just shoot me. This is so lame. And now it's just like, I'm following like literally thousands of cool artists like on Instagram, and like,
right.
It's just so much easier to find like what your jam is. And so, find your jam and like dive in. Like there was all this cool psychedelic art and all this cool visionary art, and, worked by Ernst Fuchs and Joffre and all these people. And like, I'd only like glimpsed it in like Omni magazine before that went out of print. Like, and it was completely eclipsed by fucking Renoir. It's like, oh, this is
right. It's like textbook stuff, and you're trying to find like the good shit. Like
and that's kind of, I guess that's why I still kind of have like a chip on my shoulder about blue chip art of any kind, even if it's really great blue chip art, is because it's like, stop hogging all the oxygen. Like, just like, there's so much cool shit being done, and like people need to know about that. And these living young artists that are doing cool work need the support and the patronage and of the many billions of dollars that are changing hands in the upper echelons of the art world. A tiny fraction of a percent of that is actually going to like people like you doing cool things. And, but at least it's easier to reach your audience in some ways until they change the algorithms and your reach goes to shit. Like,
yep. Yeah.
So,
well, shout out Instagram. Thank you so much, Martin. I appreciate this conversation.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, I'll definitely want to have you on again, and just tell people where they can find you real quick. Speaking of our technological overlords.
Yeah, for sure. So the RTAF podcast, and find it on your favorite podcast source or stream. But
where can we find you? Where, like your Instagram?
So my Instagram is just Martin Stensaas. It's Martin_Stensaas, STENSAAS. And that's where most of it's going on. I have a martinstensaas.com too, if
Cool.
You can see a lot more detail there.
Sweet. And what's the name of your story going to be called? Do you have a title yet?
I wanted to call it Entelechy, but I think that's a little too abstract and no one's going to get the reference. So it'll probably be something else.
Nice. Cool. Well, thanks so much, man. I really appreciate you. And thanks everybody for listening.
Thank you for tuning in, everybody. And I hope it was inspiring, instructive, enlightening, and creatively stimulating. So thanks again for having me on, and look forward to the next one.
Absolutely. All right, everyone. Peace. Thank you again for listening to another episode of RTAF Podcast. If you are interested in supporting the Patreon, That address is patreon.com/RTAF podcast. And I want to thank all my patrons. You guys keep this engine running. I couldn't do it without you. Go over there and check out the tiers I have available. It includes video, guest suggestions, patron-only posts, and some merchandise. Thank you again for listening. Please rate, review, subscribe. Do all those little things that help get RTAF into the consciousness of more and more people. Shout.